Hello, jazz lovers, and welcome to the 39th edition of the Savannah Jazz Festival. I'm Otis Johnson, and I will be interviewing one of the legends of jazz, Teddy Adams. In way of a short introduction, Teddy Adams grew up here in Savannah and had an illustrious career beginning with his service in the United States Air Force, and then he decided to come back home and rejuvenize jazz in Savannah along with the legendary Ben Tucker. Teddy is an author, and he just told me that he's working on his second book, but you really need to get the first book, and he'll tell you a little bit about that. He's a lecturer during the period of time that he worked at Savannah State. There was a program out there called Elder Hostel, where people from all over the country would make these trips, and he put together a week-long seminar on jazz and what it means to the culture in the United States. He's also a teacher and mentor, and he has produced many outstanding musicians who are following in his footsteps. And we're going to begin with asking the most fundamental question that we can ask, and that is, what is this art form called jazz?
That's a very, very good question, and it's a very difficult question to answer. On the front page of my book, they ask, I think it was Louis Armstrong or Duke Ellington, what is jazz? And his answer was this: if you have to ask, you'll never know. I never give a definition. When I was teaching and lecturing, what I would do, I would let the audience tell me. I would ask everybody to give me a bulletized definition of what they thought jazz was. And invariably, they would be saying the same thing. I could tie it all together and say, you said this, but it's very similar to what this other person said. And it's spontaneity. It's being creative within the moment, which is really the challenge. And being creative extemporaneously, yet adhering to the principles and the theory of music, and still playing the song that you're playing. That's just a brief and very general definition of what it's about.
All right. A lot of people will talk about improvisation, and that is one of the cornerstones of the art form. Would you talk a little bit about that, and is it as important as some people make it?
It's most important, the superlative degree. Jazz is predicated on improvisation. I mean, as it progressed and grew, of course, we have started notating, and we have arrangements. It's become very, very sophisticated. But in the very beginning, it was all improvisational, done basically from here. Yeah. But since the beginning of it, we are combining the innateness and the creativity with the principles of music, and just to give you an idea, a lot of people think when they hear an improvised solo that this guy is playing what he feels, which is a fact. He's making things up as he plays. That's also a fact. But what you have to understand is that when a musician is playing a song, especially if it's a song that you're familiar with, he is still playing that song. Songs have form, and they have chord changes, melody. And what a musician does when he is improvising is still adhering to the song that he's playing, the song perhaps that everyone knows. Take a common form is AABA, and there are thousands of songs with that. You have a theme, and then you repeat it, and then there's a middle part called a bridge, and then the last part of it is what you started out with. So, for instance, it might be 32 bars. So once that musician plays the melody that you recognize or that he has composed to that song, then each improvised solo covers the length of that song. And each chorus is what it's called. He never wants to repeat himself. What he's doing is creating within the moment new melodies and new ideas based upon the song that he's playing.
And this is really what sets jazz apart.
It's jazz is infinite. You know, Thelonious Monk said something that has been one of the most profound statements I've ever heard. He says, "You show me a musician without an imagination, and I'll show you a guy that needs another job." It's all about creativity and what you can imagine over what someone else has done or over what you have done if it's an original song.
Right. Now, jazz originated in the South, and it comes out of the African experience, and I guess it gets, as it grows and matures, it gets coordinated with all other forms of music.
Right.
But if you had to answer the question, how did this art form evolve? What are the roots of it?
Well, you know, they have different eras. You know, when I was teaching, and I would start off with the drums and the voices of Africa.
Yeah.
That's prior to America.
Yeah.
You know, and it's still a debate on what came first musically, whether it was the voice or the drums musically. You know, they're still arguing about that. But you had the drums and voices of Africa, and then you had the field songs and field hollers during the slavery period. And then there was the blues, you know, and then there were spirituals from the church when the African was introduced to the church and started to worship and their own church services. And then you had spirituals, you had ragtime, and everybody thinks of Scott Joplin when they hear that.
Yeah.
And then after ragtime, you had it's a funny thing about the blues and the spirituals. They both started out very slow, like dirges, and told about sad and hard times.
Yeah.
But then they both, over a period of time, became happy, and the tempo was picked up.
Yeah.
The blues became rhythm and blues and a basis for jazz, and the spirituals became gospel, started by Thomas A. Dorsey in the early 20th century.
Yeah.
You know, and then there was swing, there was Dixieland or traditional music in New Orleans, and we'll get to that later because we talked about the importance of New Orleans earlier.
Right.
And after the traditional music, we got into swing. And swing was a precursor to bebop. And no, I'm leaving something out. We had stride piano playing, stride and ragtime, and I say Scott Joplin, but swing was a precursor to bebop. Bebop was actually the revolutionary point in jazz. That probably responsible for jazz as we know it. Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, and other pioneers, they kind of very boldly put this music on another level and pointed it in the direction in which it's headed right now, or where we are right now. And then after bebop, post-bebop, and a lot of things happened after that. You know, we had fusion, we had smooth jazz and avant-garde, and avant-garde is still around. As a matter of fact, it's becoming a little more acceptable than it was in the past because John Q. Public thought people were crazy in the very beginning. I just finished a book about Ornette Coleman last week, who was one of the pioneers of that form of music. But the music has developed through different eras, and it's always been a growth, and it's still growing, and that's the important thing to remember. the jazz, the art form itself is infinite.
Yeah.
That's why it's still growing.
Yeah. There was a certain form being developed in New Orleans, but here on the coast, in the Low Country, because of the Gullah Geechee connection, there was a little difference. At least I think so, and maybe I'm wrong, but I hope you set us straight. But what distinguishes New Orleans jazz from the way the art form evolved in the Low Country of South Carolina and Georgia?
Well, New Orleans has been given credit for being the birthplace of jazz, and that you can't take from New Orleans.
Right.
And it's about, I guess it's about instruments, you know, wind instruments, horn players, and street playing, which is still very, very prominent there. The rhythm is called second line rhythm, but it was a part of the culture there. You know, when it was done for church services, it was done a lot at funerals. You know, the dirge-like sadness going to the graveyard, coming back.
Yeah.
The lively approach to it, because celebrating the celebration of life.
Right.
You compare that with, let's say, Savannah. This is a very good comparison, because unlike New Orleans and the street bands, we did have brass bands here.
Marching bands.
And we paralleled New Orleans somewhat, not to that extent, but in Charles Elmo's book, All That Savannah Jazz, he talks about early pioneers here and the guys that did similar things that New Orleans was doing, and it was done independently. No one went there and said, hey, I think we ought to do what they're doing. It was just a cultural thing. And then you move over to Charleston, only two hours away from here, the Jenkins Orphanage there.
Yeah.
Now, that orphanage maintained its existence by the music program that it had. The Reverend Jenkins, and that orphanage turned out some great players. And this is all independent, nothing to do with New Orleans. You know, from Savannah, we sent Jabbo Smith went there, one of the greatest trumpet players in early jazz. The great Cat Anderson, who was the screech man for the Ellington Orchestra, he came out of that orphanage, and Bubba Marley came out of that orphanage. So, not the same as the approach that New Orleans had, but the Low Country, Savannah, and especially Charleston, we did our own thing, and we definitely made contributions to the art form of jazz.
Right. Now you began to lift up some of those pioneers. What are some of the other great musicians that sort of made Savannah a real jazz scene?
Well, you know, when we start talking about Savannah, we go back to the great Al Cutter. You know, he and his Snappy Six. Everybody knows about Al because he had an organized band, and not only organized musically, but in dress. And they were very, very serious about that music. And Ray Snipe had a group, you know, and during my time, and someone that you can relate to, James Drayton, had a big band here of some substance, and during our time, Walter Langston maintained a big band for years. There are a lot of older guys who pioneered this music, but
what about the Dilworth brothers?
The Dilworth brothers always had an organized band. You know, it was more of a dance nature than true jazz, but it was improvisational.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the other thing about jazz. Otis, in the beginning, jazz was twofold. It was a way of musicians improvisationally expressing themselves, and at the same time, people enjoyed and they also danced.
They danced.
You know, when I started playing, they were still dancing to the music. See, the bebop period stopped the dancing.
Yeah.
The lengthy solos and the tempos said, you won't dance to this, you'll have to listen to it whether you like it or not. But Savannah is a great contributor to this art form called jazz, from the pioneering days to modern jazz, but some of the people that hail from Savannah.
Now we got to talk about West Broad Street. The younger people will only know Martin Luther King Boulevard,
Right.
but we know it as West Broad Street, and we lost a large part of the African American culture with the demise of West Broad Street as we knew it as young people coming up. So tell us a little bit about West Broad Street and why it was important to jazz in Savannah.
Well, addressing the demise, I-16 was the
Killed it.
cause of its demise.
It killed it.
because people had to relocate at
Yeah.
I-16 and also integration.
Yes,
Those two
desegregation.
things couldn't, yes, desegregation, combined, put an end to black, the nucleus of black entrepreneurship,
Yes, sir.
entertainment. West Broad Street, from what is now the Visitor Center to perhaps Anderson Street, was on both sides.
On both sides.
Was very, it entailed everything that a person was looking for.
Yeah.
You know, you had churches, you had stores, you had restaurants, you had nightclubs. You had the only black hotel on the corner of West Broad and Gaston in Savannah. All of the theaters were on, we had 3 on West Broad Street. And the significant thing about West Broad and Gaston was we had 2 theaters there and several clubs. And the only hotel, the Dunbar Hotel, meaning that all of the entertainers, all of the musicians who came to town had to stay at that hotel.
Yeah.
Therefore, with the clubs being in the same proximity and the hotel being there, they would have daily jam sessions sometimes, jam sessions during the day. In a 3-block radius, 4-block radius, there were probably 4 clubs that did live music, you know, and on all of the jukeboxes, whether they were restaurants or bars, there was a lot of jazz on it.
Yeah.
And that's what I grew up relating to. You know, I had heard it even before I became seriously interested in being a part of it.
Yeah.
You know, the environment, West Broad Street was the closest thing to a big city that a local person could experience. When the guys came to town, they hung there.
Yeah.
You know, so you had the local musicians, you had the national musicians, you had the jam sessions. It was little New York to me. When I discovered West Broad Street, then I basically lived there when I wasn't in school or doing other things, because I realized then that just in case I never leave Savannah, this is the closest thing, this is what I expect to find out there.
Yeah.
And I can say this very truthfully, Otis. When I left Savannah as a result of my exposure on West Broad Street, I was well prepared for the world musically and as a person, because the diverse cultures and exposure there was, it was worldly. And I pay tribute. I got my PhD there at a very, very early age.
All right. Now, Teddy, a lot of this music developed during the Jim Crow era. And one thing about jazz, unlike a lot of other art forms, you didn't discriminate against anybody because of color. It was if you could read the music, if you could play, if you could improvise, you were accepted. Talk a little bit about that, because that's an unusual social condition during Jim Crow.
Well, you know, especially pertaining to jazz and music in general, but in Savannah has always had a lot of places that promoted live entertainment, restaurants, clubs, and black musicians were always allowed to play the clubs, even if they weren't allowed to to mingle, or we had to be in different areas on breaks, you know. But the playing situations, black musicians were always allowed to play in white clubs, and on the bandstand itself, there was never separation. You know, blacks and whites have always played together. I remember at the age of 15 on Tybee at the DeSoto, at the Tybee Hotel. I sat in with the group there, and I met one of the entrepreneurs here in Savannah, Sprague Exley.
Oh, yeah.
He was playing drums.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
the band was a black band, but they allowed anyone who could play or was interested in playing to come and play. So the bandstand was integrated then, and all the black clubs that I played in subsequent to that, there was never a problem with white musicians coming in and playing along with the musicians as long as they could play. and unlike white clubs where blacks were not allowed to actually go in and co-mingle there, in black clubs, whites were always allowed to come in, especially jazz clubs, because that's where the jazz was. The bandstand was integrated, so John Q. Public was welcomed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about Kenny Palmer? Talk a little bit
One
about
of my favorite people.
Yeah.
First, let me say this. To date, Kenny Palmer is probably, we have some up-and-coming piano players, but Kenny Palmer is probably the best piano player that's a product of Savannah. You know, we've had great piano players to come here from other places and stay for long periods of time.
Yeah.
Kenny Palmer was a Savannian. He was a great arranger. He was an artist. He was a beautiful person. I met Kenny at the age of maybe 17, and he was hosting a jam session on River Street. And at that time, River Street only had two clubs. That was the Boar's Head and the Port Royal. Kenny played, along with his wife Betty Palmer, a duo at the Boar's Head, and he ran a jam session at Port Royal. And he had special guests coming in. And it was a great mixture of black and whites, and color or racism never came into play. It was about the music. Everybody had fun, and that lasted for quite some time.
Yeah.
Kenny Palmer was a great influence and very instrumental in maintaining jazz here in Savannah.
Well, what about your partner in crime with the Savannah Jazz Orchestra?
Well, Dr. Randall Reeves?
Yes.
I'll tell you, Randy and I, when I returned to Savannah in 1976, after being away for almost 20 years, and I, of course, hooked up with Ben Tucker and tried to reestablish some things here. But I met Randy shortly after I arrived, and I would go out and we started a group of the better musicians in Savannah, and I think the original name was the Contemporary Jazz Project.
Whoa.
And we did a little something, and then it was later changed to the Savannah Jazz Orchestra. Randy and I have been together more than 30 years, and we have put forth our very best effort to keep the music alive and to maintain a big band during this time, which is pretty hard to do.
Hard, yeah.
So he's definitely my partner in crime, and he's in the trenches with me.
Now, I know our time is getting short, and I want to talk about two things, and that is, during the 70s, jazz went into a hiatus period here, and it was hard to go out and experience live jazz. And when you came back, just tell us about what the tradition was around Christmas, which y'all rejuvenated and is still going strong after all of these years.
Okay.
And then the final thing, if we can get it in, is that we have had some outstanding female artists. And if you could talk about a few of those, because we don't want to leave the females out because they have played a major role in the art form.
Right. Well, you know, prior to my leaving here, the Christmas concert was something that was sponsored by the black local. The locals have since combined. It was the local 704. So all of the organized bands would get together on Christmas Day. And those that were not a part of an organized band would have a big jam session. That went on for years, and somehow it was discontinued. When I returned and found out that it had been discontinued, I decided to start it up again. And now we're going on at least 38, maybe 40 years of doing that, no, more than that. And we have never missed a Christmas, and it's still a very, very gala affair, and some guys come to town simply because of that particular celebration.
Yeah.
Women in jazz, of course, singers.
Oh, yes.
Singers. But we've had a couple of good piano players here. The guy, Jimmy Lloyd Brown of Brick. A lot of people don't know that his mother, Evelyn Brown, was a very, very fine pianist. And there was also Billy Austin, who was once married to the saxophonist Tanny Austin.
Yeah.
Great piano player.
Yeah.
And we've had great singers. Stella Storms was a great singer. And Irene Reed. Originally from Savannah.
Yep.
Great singer. Presently we have Huxley Scott, who is a great singer. And we have Gina Renee, who is also a great singer. So, I mean, these people are Savannahans, and they made great contributions to the art form.
And finally, tell us about your present book that's already on the market, and then tell us what you're working on.
Well, the book that I completed about 2 years ago is called The Up of the Downbeat. It chronicles my life as a musician. It pays homage to Savannah, Georgia, which I give all the credit for whatever little that I have accomplished. And I have some very rare conversations and experiences that you would not otherwise know unless you read the book. I've been fortunate enough to play with some very, very great musicians, and I've had some very intimate and unusual conversations with them. I'm presently, because of this corona pandemic, I gave it some serious thought and realized that I left a lot out of the first book, and then a lot has happened since completed because I worked on it for several years before it was published. So I'm now taking notes and leaning toward doing a second book, a sequel to that.
Finally, you have been a mentor to a lot of up-and-coming musicians. Talk to us about some of your, and maybe this is not the right way to put it, but who are some of your most promising musicians that are coming to fill the void?
Well, you know, I'm a trombone player.
Yep.
So I guess I can point, some of my better work, if lack of a better way of saying it, I've been instrumental in pointing in the right direction some very fine trombone players. I'm not taking credit for their talent because they had that. I just kind of pointed them in the right direction. Right. Stan Wilkerson, great trombone player. Yeah. Andre Murchison, great trombone player. Robert Stringer, and those guys have played. Andre has played with the White Hargrove Big Band. He's presently playing with Abdullah Ibrahim. Robert, I think, for the last big celebration with Aretha Franklin, 2 of my students were part of the trombone section. That was Andre, and that was Robert. We have Jerron McCarr that came out of the, all of these kids came out of the Savannah Arts Academy. A great job. All these guys have a master's in jazz studies, so it's just not an on-the-job training thing or something they like doing. They're qualified and they have formal training. And then one of my prize students is Alex Wynn. Very, very fine trumpet player.
Very fine.
Living in New York and surviving. And I don't play piano, but Carl Pope, the principal trombonist with the symphony here, brought his son to me and said, I know you don't play piano, but you have experience. sit and talk to him and show him some things that he needs to know. So Brendan Pope, who is a Savannah and promises to be an outstanding piano player, Eric Vaughn, who's given to me at the age of 14 by his father. He's living in Germany now. Great drummer, I'm sure there are some more that I'm leaving out, but the few lives that I have touched, I'm very proud of the progress that they have made and what they are doing musically.
Now there's an effort to build a jazz museum that will house the Hall of Fame and a whole lot of other stuff. What is your hope for that, and whatever kind of closing comments that you would want to share with us?
Well, firstly, a speedy completion. And I'm throwing out there, we accept donations. If you have any philanthropists or do-gooders or people who just want to see it culminate, this is going to be an entity that celebrates Savannah's contribution to the art form of jazz. Savannah has made great contributions. The great Trummy Young, the great Ben Riley, the great James Moody, Irene Reed, the list goes on and on, that Shahib Shahab, these people are from Savannah and the jazz world knows about them. We're going to be celebrating those people in this museum and also individuals who help to promote and keep this music alive and going. As a matter of fact, Otis, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag. I am going to suggest you be inducted into that. I can only suggest or nominate because you have been a supporter ever since that I have been back as the mayor and as a person, and you're still supporting it. So we have, in the last 10 or 12 years, we have inducted quite a few Savannahans who have made contributions. Dr. Randall Reese was put in there. We have a lot of, we're going to put 2 people in this year. I think Tom Glazer, who was one of the founders of the Jazz Festival and the Coastal Jazz Association, and also Eric Jones, who has growth-wise, I can't think of anybody that I can speak of more highly than him. So the museum is going to be a celebration of our contribution and legacy to jazz, and hopefully we're going to complete and open it next year.
Great. So I guess we've come full cycle, and we've talked about what is this art form and how diverse it is and how everybody can relate to it. I haven't found anybody who first says, well, I don't like jazz, and then you play for them a variety of jazz, and then they don't say that anymore. It has something for everybody. And I remember, and I don't know whether you went through this at Beach High School or not, but we had a chemistry teacher by the name of Raymond Washington.
Yes.
And in the chemistry lab, he would set up what we called in those days a Victrola and play jazz records. And that's how I got introduced to jazz. Plus I played in the high school band, and I became a lover of it, and I've been a lover of it ever since. And I say that when I come back in my next life, I want to be a jazz musician. But what has been the driving force in your life to keep you going at it all of these years and in the various ways that you have dealt with this art form?
The freedom of the music and the fact that it has contributed to so many different music forms, just as much as it has drawn from different music forms, and it has permeated the world. As a matter of fact, in some places, jazz is more respected and is more profound to some of the people there than it is here in America, its birthplace.
No doubt about it.
You know, so the freedom of the music and the happiness that it has given others, and the dedication of the guys, the musicians who dedicate their lives to it, just studying the pioneers. And I'm a stickler for knowing the history of the music and the great people that helped to produce this art form.
Right.
That in itself keeps me motivated, interested, and forever grateful for this art form and my small portion of being involved in it.
Well, this is probably the first activity in the 39th edition. So tell us what people can expect during this 2020 edition of the Savannah Jazz Festival.
You know, one might think that because of the pandemic that this would be maybe a watered down festival. What's lacking is the camaraderie and the gathering in Forsyth Park and other places.
Yeah.
But as far as the quality of the festival, this is going to rate as being one of the better festivals we've had. We have some outstanding people. We have, of course, Wycliffe Gordon coming back. We have Emmett Coyne Trio, great piano player. We have Zydeco Band coming out of New Orleans, speaking about New Orleans. We have the Savannah Jazz Orchestra is not playing this year, but we have a Savannah Jazz Orchestra All-Star group that's going to play and introduce to the public a new vocalist here in Savannah, Miss Cynthia Utterbach.
Oh,
great singer. We're going to showcase her. And then there's going to be the Savannah All-Stars, Savannah Hall of Fame All-Stars, which myself, Randall Reese, Delbert Felix, and because of Eric Jones, he's being inducted this year, and Huxley Scott, we're going to perform. But we have a lot of great acts, and we have the movie produced by Clint Eastwood on Dave Brubeck, who a very, very important person in the creation of the music. It's just a great festival. You won't realize it's going to be streamed. It won't be the live, real-time, interactive audiences and like that, but the streaming and the caliber of musicians and the quality of the acts, you will not be disappointed when you see them.
Great. Well, this has been great, man. I really thank Jazz, the Savannah Jazz, for allowing me to interview you. You know that a lot in terms of this music has rested upon you and others believing that it is worth working hard for and sacrificing for. And so this has been Otis Johnson interviewing Teddy Adams, and we hope that you will have a wonderful time at this 39th edition of the Savannah Jazz Festival.